Okay. All right. We're in our fourth and last week in the book of Daniel. For those of you who haven't been here, or just a little quick recap. The first week we talked about what does it mean for us to be exiles and living in a different culture. And either we tend to think that we have to choose between one culture and another. But what we learned about is that God says, no, you can live and you can be in both, but you just need to remember that your citizenship is ultimately in heaven. And then the second week, we talked about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That was the week that I taped my sermon, so if you guys haven't watched it, don't worry about it. You can still go back. It's still on the internet. And I talked about kind of the idols that we choose to worship, the things that we choose to make time for in our lives. And then last week we talked about what happens when we give our lives over to Babylon, when we choose to embrace Babylon, when we become the beasts that we are technically fighting against, in that when we embrace the kind of the ways of the world and what that looks like in our lives. And today we're going to be in Daniel chapter 6. So if you have your Bibles or your apps, go ahead and bring that out. But before we get going, I'm going to go ahead and open up with a word of prayer. Dear God, I just thank you for this day. I thank you for everybody here. I just thank you for the opportunity to preach your word, Lord. I just pray that through these words tonight, that they are you speaking through me, that this is your message, Lord. And God, I just thank you so much for your love and your son, Jesus. And I just pray that we remember that as we go about our life this week. I pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen. So today, like I said, we're going to be in Daniel chapter 6, which is the lion's den, which is, I talked a couple weeks ago about when I preached from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, kind of about, I always get nervous around these kind of classic stories that most of us who have grown up in the church have heard time and time again. Either that, or there's been a really good VeggieTales movie made about it. And it's the same. It's the,
It's really good.
it's the same. It's the same issue I have every year at Easter and Christmas. Like, how do I preach the same sermon but different, without it being literally the exact same sermon every year? And so that was kind of my struggle this week, as I was reading through Daniel chapter 6, and I was just like, how do I? Because, like, in honesty too, like, this story is very similar to previous stories we've preached in Daniel, in Daniel chapter 3 with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel chapter 1, where both Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they choose not to follow the edict of the king. They choose to say, no, we're going to worship God, and we're gonna be okay with the consequences, and yet God kind of shows up and saves them. And so I was just like, man, what am I gonna do? And so this is kind of the outlook I had this week as I was kind of going through this. But kind of one of the things, what I'm going to end up preaching on is going to be less on what the passage says and more on what the passage doesn't say. And I hope that makes sense here in a little bit. And I believe it is biblical still. It was just one of those weeks where God just really convicted me through the things that were happening in my life, like actual events, and the things I was struggling with this week as well. And kind of like through that lens, it made the story kind of come alive in a different way for me. So all that to say, let me give you some backstory. So as most of you know, I got let go from my job at the beginning of the year, and I've been trying to make my way doing freelance gigs the last couple of months. And about the about February, somewhere about halfway through February, I got a Facebook message from another pastor in the area who is also, he's a church planner and he's a bivocational pastor. Pastor Trevor and I met him last year, and we had lunch with him, and he, like I said, he's bivocational as well. He has a pool business, which, I mean, honestly, what a perfect place to have a pool business. Like, I feel like you're just never without customers here. And so he invited me to this networking group that he was a part of, and he was saying like, hey, if you want, you can come and you can check it out. He was telling me, he's like, hey, yeah, I wish I would have had a group like this when I started my business 20 years ago, and it really helps. It really helps. And so I was like, sure. I went and checked it out, and it's called BNI. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of BNI. It's Business Networking International is what it stands for. And it's one of the things that I was telling Megan last night. Like, they're pretty intense in that they they have like attendance requirements, and like you have to pay dues, and the dues aren't cheap. And but the idea is that every week everybody in the group stands up, tells everybody kind of, hey, this is my business. This is kind of the different kind of clients or the different kind of customers I'm looking for this week. And you have a room full of people who are listening and saying, and they next time somebody in their life says, hey, I need a pest control person. Guess what? I got a pest control guy. And hey, I need somebody to come, and I need somebody with my insurance or with a mortgage, realtors and all that stuff. I know all those people. So FYI, if you guys like need a plumber, electrician, we don't have a seamstress. So if you guys ever need any information, just let me know. I know a guy or a girl for a lot of these jobs out there. And the idea is that everybody's kind of looking at the motto behind BNI is givers gain. It's not about what can I get out of it, it's what can I give to other people. It's very biblical in that aspect. Yeah, so I joined this group, and right around the same time, there was another person who joined the group who was kind of working in the similar field to me. Oh, that's another thing, is that each group, there's like 50 groups in the valley. Each group is supposed to have only one person for each like job. So that way you're recommending just the people in your group, and people don't have overlap or whatever. So this other person came into the group, and we had similar kind of tastes and did some things that were similar, but in a lot of things I think we were very, very different in other ways too. I mean, some of it was my fault. Like I stood up and I would tell people, hey, I do this. And part of it's just like, I'm just new at business. I told Megan, like, I'm just like saying yes to like every job that'll come my way these days. If somebody will pay me to do it, I'll probably do it. And so, just kind of went through this for a couple months. And, oh yeah, that's the other thing is every week you stand up and you say, hey, this is who I am. This is my business. This is the type of customer I'm looking for. And so, ended up, like I said, there was kind of a little crossover. And then I found out a couple weeks ago that there had been a complaint filed against me. And the first thing the first sense I got was like when I was like a kid, and like the principal was like, I was being called to the principal's office. I'm like, what'd I do? And then I told Megan, I was like, you know what? I didn't do anything wrong. Whatever. I don't care. And in the end, it's not that big a deal. Like, I'm not going to jail for anything that happens. And this other person who had joined the group at the same time as me, and we have some similar things, had filed a complaint against me. And I ended up having coffee with two of the members of the membership committee this week, and they told me about the complaint. And I just told them, I was like, you know what, if I did anything like that, like, it was not on purpose. Like, I'm not trying. I told him, I said, I'm just still figuring out what it means to be in business. Like, I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes or anything like that. But I have to admit, like, it really hurt my feelings that this person just filed a complaint. They never came and talked to me. They never said, like, hey, like, I think that you should maybe not do this or say this differently or whatever. It was just, hey, there's a complaint against you. And I told Megan, because it took like 2 weeks before we actually had the meeting. First, they had something come up, the membership committee people, and then I got COVID. And then this last week we met, and I'm technically on probation in the group. And I just told him, I said, hey, you know what? I'm still figuring out business. I was like, I'm just learning how to like keep my books. If I did anything wrong, I apologize. I'm not into this to do that, but yeah, I found myself at our meeting this week. I didn't really look at the person, didn't talk to the person, because I was hurt, and I don't have a close relationship with this person, so I can't really say like, like, how dare you or anything like that. But it's supposed to be a person I'm supposed to be like helping out in business. We're supposed to be working together. They have these things. They have these groups. They have these smaller groups within each chapter they call your power team. And this is the other person in my power team right now. And I'm like, how are we supposed to like go from like you like reporting me to being like, let's help each other out. And so I just was like, I didn't want to forgive this person. I was like, I'm going to look for another group, And then I read Daniel chapter 6. And it's kind of a classic story, like I said. It's the story of Daniel in the lion's den. And it starts off with there's a new king, it's King Darius. And he appoints these 120 satraps. I know I'm saying that wrong, but they're these workers that oversee different aspects of his kingdom. And of those 120, they report to 3 like higher leaders. So like 40 each report to somebody who's higher than that. And Daniel is doing so good at his job, he's killing it. Basically, the king's like, hey, I'm going to bump him up. He's going to be like basically like the vice president. And so all the other workers, they kind of get jealous of Daniel, and they're like, hey, we gotta trip him up. We gotta find something. It's kind of like politics today. We gotta find some dirt on him, We gotta go bribe his old teachers and talk to his ex-girlfriends. I don't know. But these guys' ideas. They go and they convince the king. They say, hey, King Darius, we have this great idea. You should make a rule so for 30 days, nobody's allowed to pray to any other god or any other person other than you. And not only not just a decree, but you need to put it in writing. And so the king's like, sure, I'll do that. Even though he loves Daniel. And so this all happens. And then I love in verse 10, it says, now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows was open towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. So as soon as they're like, hey, we got this new rule, Daniel's like, cool, I'm going to go home and pray just like I've been doing. And it doesn't even faze him at all. And then, of course, I don't know, they were sending spies after him, and they figure out that he's praying 3 times a day to his God, and they go and they tell they go and tell King Darius, and Darius is like, hey guys, like, can't we like just forget this rule thing? And they're like, you put it in writing. I mean, I don't know. I don't think King Darius is that great of a king. I guess he doesn't have as much power as he wants to. And then it talks about how like King Darius, like he really didn't want to do this, but like rules are rules. So they tie him up And they tie him up to throw him into the lion's den. And it says in verse 16, this is what King Darius says: "May your God, whom you serve, continually rescue you." Even King Darius is saying, "Hey, I want your God to perform a miracle." So they take a stone and they they throw him into the lion's den. They take a stone, they come and they cover the door. And then verse 18 it says, "Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. After the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, 'Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions?' Daniel answered, 'May the king live forever.'" I don't know about you, but if this guy just ordered me to be thrown in with like a bunch of hungry, ravenous lions, like my first response isn't going to be, "Hey, buddy, may you live forever."
Maybe
Maybe
if
you
it
come
was,
join me.
Yeah.
maybe if it was like the Southern Bless Your Heart.
Yeah.
The king live forever.
And in verse 22, it says, yeah, it says, "Daniel, may the king live forever. My God has sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." You see, Daniel may have technically broken the law. I don't think that's ever in dispute. But he is still considered innocent. Verse 23, "The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God." Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say he came out swearing and cursing and blaming everybody else. Like, "How could you have done this to me? Why didn't you know don't you know who I am?" He doesn't say like, "Hey, you need to go get those people." Daniel doesn't say any of that. In verse 24, "At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones." Vicious. But Daniel's never the one that instigates this. He's never the one that says, "Hey, go get him." In fact, the king is the one who the whole time seems like the reluctant person following along with him. And it talks about how, and it says, "The king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel." Remember, he broke the rule of the law. He broke the law the way it was written. He prayed to another god other than King Darius during those 30 days. But it says over and over again that he was innocent and that he was falsely accused. And I think what it comes down to is the fact that God cares more about where our heart is than whether or not we keep or break the letter of the law sometimes. Verse 28, "So Daniel prospered during the reigns of Darius, the reign of Cyrus, and the reign of Cyrus the Persian." So Daniel goes on and he lives happily ever after. And what I want to talk about today is this idea of forgiveness. I have struggled with forgiveness this week. I openly admit that. At the same time, I got a text from this person that charged me, I guess you could say. "Hey, we need to have a meeting because we have to have we're working together." And my first instinct was like, I don't want to meet with you. My second instinct was like, why am I letting this control me? Why am I letting this thing be in my life? And in reality, like I said, nothing really came of it. I'm not in trouble with the law. I didn't break any actual rules. But I just like learned this. I was just like, why am I letting this thing control me? Why can I not forgive this person? And then I watched Ted Lasso this week. Anybody watch Ted Lasso?
We're not caught up, but we've been watching.
Well, this week it had a lot to do with forgiveness, and Ted, he tells one of the players, Jamie Tart, whose dad is a horrible person. Basically, his whole life he had been letting his hatred for his dad kind of motivate him, and he suggests, why don't you just forgive him? He's like, I'm not giving him that satisfaction. He's like, forgiveness isn't releasing him, it's releasing yourself. And oftentimes when we're upset at people, when we hold a grudge, when we refuse to forgive, most of the time that other person has no idea that we're even mad at them. Most of the time we are the ones that are kind of in bondage to that anger, towards those feelings. And I was thinking this week about Megan and I did a class in college where we went to South Africa, and we read a book by the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was a lifelong anti-apartheid activist in South Africa. And once they finished the apartheid government in South Africa, the name of the book is No Future Without Forgiveness. And this idea was that, hey, we can't just go on into the future and pretend like these horrible things didn't happen in the past. At the same time, if we locked up everybody who did something bad in the last 40 years, we would have no society left over. Everybody's kind of at fault in some way. And so they did this Truth and Reconciliation Commission that traveled around the country, where they gave everybody the opportunity, hey, if you come and you come clean and you admit the things that you did, there will be you get full immunity, there's no prosecution. And like sometimes come and tell us where the literal bodies are buried. And you can come and this whole time it was a matter of allowing people to become free from the things that were holding them back. Like people have been holding on to secrets for years, and I don't know if you guys ever like held on to like a bad secret or lived in shame of something, and it begins to eat at you and it begins to control you, and it isn't good for you. It's not healthy. And so it's this idea that when we forgive people, and not even when you don't even have to forgive people, but when we admit our sins and we give people the opportunity to forgive us, it releases us both from bondage. And I think Daniel was literally in bondage in a lion's den, and thank God was literally that he was there with them and kept him safe. But I'm more impressed with the fact that Daniel's first response wasn't, all right, now go get those guys. His first response was, may the king live forever. And I don't know if I would have been that good of a person. Especially, like I said, the stuff that happened this last couple of weeks for me, like I feel like is a very small microcosm compared to being thrown into a lion's den. Yeah, exactly.
But they're the quintessential lion.
Yeah.
They're the euphemism of
Yeah,
the wrong word.
the parable, what's the word we're looking for? So
They're the lions in your mind.
yeah. So that's what the lesson this week I wanted to forgive. I wanted to talk about. It's just this idea of, and it kind of comes back to life in Babylon. What does it mean to live in Babylon? And to live in Babylon means we have to forgive people. We have to release people from bondage, and we have to allow ourselves to forgive people. And I mean, I just think of like what a radical testimony for people to forgive so freely. I mean, it sounds lame, but it reminds me of Les Mis. Has everybody familiar with Les Mis?
Yeah, it's like the
The main character, Jean Valjean, steals bread, to not go hungry, goes to prison, escapes from prison, ends up in a priest's house or a church, and he steals a bunch of stuff and he runs away.
Wait, you're talking about the county one,
No, that's.
Les Mis.
Yeah.
because that sounds
Oh,
like.
does that happen? Yeah, maybe it happens there too.
But he gets caught and they bring him back and instead of the priest being like, yeah, he stole from us, he's like, oh, you forgot the candlesticks. You forgot these other things that you didn't take. And yeah, if I woke up and my car was gone, I don't think my first reaction would be to be like, you forgot
That's why his reaction was like,
Yeah.
like Nabal was the king because okay, they had
Yeah.
no, like it said in the word, like he had no fault, right?
yeah,
So he had peace within
Yeah.
himself. So he didn't have to, how dare you put me in the lambs, and he had so much trust in God too that
Yeah.
God is obviously faithful.
yeah. And I think that all that to say is like, I think that our testimony of forgiveness can be a very powerful thing, especially when the world is telling us that person doesn't deserve forgiveness, that person doesn't deserve to be, whatever.
Think about holding on to that. One of the greatest things I ever heard, and it was really freeing after